Hey everyone, let's chat about the best way to feed and fertilize blueberry bushes. So, there are a lot of unique things about blueberries, and that can make fertilizing and feeding them a little bit tricky. So, we're going to go over a few of those right now um, because without fertilizing and feeding them properly, you're going to end up with deficiencies in your bushes, resulting in lower yields and poor performance, and maybe bushes that don't thrive or even die. So, blueberries need acidic soil. They're a little different than most other plants. They prefer soil between 4.5 and 5.5 of pH, which is acidic. 7 is neutral. Anything above 7 is alkaline. So, blueberry plants need acidic soil for the nutrients to be available for their roots. Once you start getting above a pH around 6, which is still acidic, it's not even alkaline, the nutrient uptake slows. Iron and magnesium become unavailable, the leaves start yellowing. So blueberries need acidic soil, otherwise they will not perform properly. So soil gets alkaline over time because the water irrigation that flows through it adds minerals to it, and those minerals raise alkalinity. So even if you started with appropriate soil for your blueberries, you should still test semi-regularly every year or two to make sure that the soil is remaining acidic, and you don't need to acidify it more to compensate for the alkalinization that's happening from your irrigation. The best spot to test the soil is near the crown of the plant, right there, a few inches away from it. And you're looking for, like I said, a optimal pH of 4.5 to 5.5. That is a digital pH soil tester. There are also test strips you can use that allow you to test a few more areas. The strips are actually maybe a little bit more accurate than that digital meter. You can buy really good digital meters, but pH is something that can fluctuate a bit depending on how wet the ground is, but also water can impact the pH. So it's the other readers can be a little bit problematic, whereas the test strips work a little bit better. So if you've got sandy soil, it loses its nutrients quickly, and you probably have to feed the blueberries more often and maybe even make the soil more acidic more often. Loam soils are the best. They usually don't need a lot of adjustments. And clay soils also need a lot of often need a lot of amendments to just get to having better soil structure through organic matter, and then applying some sulfur to acidify it. So the best way to acidify your soil is elemental sulfur. That's a long-term acidifier. It gradually lowers the pH over several months, and you just put it on the topsoil and then spread it on the surface, and the rainwater and stuff actually leaches it into the soil to help get it down a little bit lower. Clay soil doesn't need as much of it because it's so dense, it holds on to that sulfur and that acidity more easily, whereas sandy and loam soils require a little bit more because they drain off that acidity that you're putting in there. And if you don't want to use elemental sulfur, you can also use pine needles as mulch. Pine needles help maintain acidic conditions. They're probably not going to be enough to get your ground acidic on its own, but it will help keep your ground acidic. And that pine needle mulch works nicely because it also suppresses weeds, and works to hold the moisture in. So you don't need as much water irrigation that's then leaching that acidity from the soil. Finally, a good fertilizer is cottonseed meal. It's a slow release fertilizer. I would always go with the organic version. It's high in nitrogen. It's good for blueberries because it is a little bit acidic, so it works well for acid-loving plants. So azaleas are another option. In this one, you just put a little bit in the soil around each mature bush in the early spring. So by season, how do you want to fertilize your blueberry plant so that way it does not waste fertilizer or miss something? So earlier in the spring, right as the buds are starting to form, you're going to want to apply cottonseed meal. or another organic acid-loving fertilizer, and you're going to want to test the pH. If the pH is not optimal, you're going to want to add some elemental sulfur as well. So early spring, we're adding a fertilizer to get some nitrogen into the ground and some other trace minerals, and we're also testing for pH to see if we need to add sulfur to get the soil more acidic. Then later in spring, once the berries start developing, we're going to add a little bit more cottonseed meal. This is where you can check the leaf colors a little bit to see if the plant's giving you any signs that it needs more. But otherwise, we're just going to do some side dressing with cottonseed meal or fish emulsions. Those work well as a fertilizer, a quick hit fertilizer for blueberry bushes right around the time that they are fruiting. And then after harvest, we're going to do a light feeding with cottonseed meal, avoiding heavy nitrogen because we don't want to do it too late in the season because that encourages leafy growth that then is all just going to get killed when it frosts later in the year and sets the plant up for potential disease in those branches and things that die and don't survive the winter. So certain zone adjustments you're going to want to make are zones 3 through 5, so think cold. You're going to have the 2 main spring feedings, and then you also might do a post-harvest feeding as well. And then in zone 9, that's the one where the extra feeding is really important, 6 through 9. That's your hot areas, and that's just due to the environmental stress and the fact that those soils often aren't quite as perfect for blueberries. So now let's talk about some of the deficiencies blueberry plants see. Iron deficiency is one, and these occur just because, again, they need the acidic soil to take these nutrients up. So if you don't got the acidic soil, you might be thinking it's a fertilizer deficiency when really it's you got to get the soil acidic so it can actually take up the nutrients that are in that ground. So iron deficiency, you are going to see yellowing leaves with still very green veins, and that's generally a pH problem. A nitrogen deficiency is you're going to have red tinted leaves in the summer, and that's just it doesn't have enough of that nitrogen to make those leaves nice and green. And again, when you treat this problem, especially if it's later in the season, you want to use minimal nitrogen because you don't want to put too much in where it just sends the plant crazy with a bunch of new growth that then is going to be too weak to survive the winter. A phosphorus deficiency is poor root growth, small berries, delayed ripening. Again, that is going to be a pH issue. The rest of them outside of nitrogen are going to be pH problems, with the soil being too alkaline most likely. Potassium deficiencies are, you're going to have like leaf burn on the edge. The inside of the leaf might look fine and the outer edge is kind of curling and burnt a little bit. And then a magnesium deficiency is you're going to see yellowing in between the veins, with the veins still remaining very green. So they're similar issues, similar signs, but they are distinct enough that if you go ahead and kind of save this or study this a little bit and just kind of remember iron yellow, nitrogen red, potassium, burning leaves, phosphorus, small berries, and magnesium, the yellow leaves with the green veins. You can kind of tell what your plant needs. But again, it's generally going to be one of two things. Either you need to make the soil more acidic so it can get the trace nutrients that are already there, or it might need a little bit of nitrogen just to kind of combat the heavy feeding of putting those berries and fruit out for us to enjoy. Mistakes to avoid. So if you give too much nitrogen, as I've been saying, it leads to leafy growth at the expense of fruit production, and we want blueberries. That's the goal, not leaves. So we don't want to do too much nitrogen. We need enough so that the plant's healthy, but not so much that it's like, oh my gosh, let's only make leaves and no blueberries. High salt fertilizers also aren't the best. You want to make sure that you're getting some nitrogen in there and you're not upsetting the soil balance too much. You want to make sure we're trying to keep it acidic. And some of those saltier fertilizers can add alkaline to it. The next thing is you don't want to feed too late in the fall to where we're just making that tender growth that the frost is going to kill, and those dead branches invite parasites and disease. Skipping soil tests. So you want to make sure to test the soil so you know what is actually missing and you can amend it appropriately. Too much nitrogen, you're going to end up with more problems and you wasted your money. It didn't even need that fertilizer to begin with. So my suggestion is test once or twice a year with those little cheap test strips just to make sure everything looks okay. Maybe every 2 or 3 years, or if you've got a problem you really can't solve, send a soil test off to your county extension office, your ag extension office, the FSA office. One of those should be able to do some testing for you. That's a bit more, it's going to be done at a lab, so it's a bit more guaranteeable. And then the final thing is blueberries aren't a crop you can plant and forget. They do need amendments. They need to make sure you're keeping their soil in the pH range that they like, and that doesn't always happen naturally. Rainwater itself can also leach out and make soil more alkaline over time. So strong roots lead to strong fruit, and blueberries are an awesome addition to your garden and homestead. They provide such great nutrients and antioxidants. They're totally worth it, but they're not always a beginner-friendly bush just because of the amount of amendments you have to make to the ground. But once you've got a spot that you want to put them, start getting that ground acidic, add some of your elemental sulfur, and let's get those in the ground, because as soon as you can start enjoying them, they're nature's healing food. That deep blue color is just ripe with antioxidants ready for you to eat, enjoy, and heal your body with. So hope this helps. Hope you have great blueberry harvests, and